Hello, welcome to Yesterday's Airlines and another 1/400 scale model review. And in this review, we look back on an older model, which I've actually just acquired new anyway. And this is this beautiful Apollo Models Boeing 747-400 in the Nature's Wing livery of Garuda Indonesia. Now, the first thing to mention is obviously that Apollo are no longer around. They were a sub-brand of Witty Wings, and they went out of business in 2014. But this mold is much older than that and also younger than that, in the sense that it was used before Apollo and has been used afterwards. Anyway, as always, my 400 scale reviews split into 3 sections, each of them scored out of 10. Firstly, we look at the mold of the aircraft. Secondly, we look at the livery application, and thirdly, we take a look at the quality control and the printing. So it's a max score out of 30. Let's get on, and we'll start with the mold. There are lots of 747-400 molds out there, so we can just concentrate on the best few, and let's begin. Now, this mold is pretty old. It originally came from Big Bird way back near the turn of the century. It was used by Aeroclassics. It has been passed through the Witty Wings lineage and Apollo, and they were then sold, or at least all the molds were sold to JC Wings. So it is then come under the ownership of JC, who have it's a little unclear whether they own it directly or whether they just kind of steward for the mold, but nonetheless it's been used by Big Bird Mark III in most recent times, though not very regularly. Nonetheless, it's a mold. There are lots of different models out there using this mold, though many of them are very rare, which is a damn shame because this is a very fine 747. So, I mean, it's an older mold, so it's a cradle mount, so you've got this seam over here around the wing, but it follows the standard wing fairing. It really doesn't bother me at all. It also doesn't have rolling gear. Frankly, I don't care about that either. Rolling gear is a bit of a fad and a waste of time unless you're actually moving your models, and who the hell does that? You can see that the main gear bogies here actually do move a little bit, which is a nice feature. So even though it's an older mold, it's a really nicely shaped one. And ironically, all the best 747s at present are on older molds. This model was released in 2013, at exactly the same time that Phoenix released the same aircraft. But the Phoenix 747-400 is a shocking mess, and shame on you if you own any of them, because they are possibly the worst mold in 400 scale, especially when you have the option to buy this fine mold in its place. I don't really have any real issues with this mold. It is beautiful. The nose especially is spot on, unlike a Phoenix 747, which looks appalling. Also, the wings here, they angle nicely. And on the Phoenix 747, they're incredibly low and kind of sit in this dreadful angle. You can see from the front that they move up nicely. Yeah, it's got old-fashioned engines here, which obviously aren't see-through, but none of the 747-400 molds have see-through engines. Overall, the shape is very nice. The wing is good. The engines are good. The back end is pretty much perfect. You know, I hear complaints from people about the pylon join here. The pylon join here being a little bit, less than spectacular. I think that's, nitpicking. I think it's pretty good. And this rates for me as probably the best, or at least up there with the best of the 747-400 molds that are available in this scale. If we just put it aside for a second, we can have a look at a couple of the other contender molds here. We've got this Dragon Wings mold, which is actually the second best mold, I think. It's a lovely shape, but suffers from all the issues that Dragon models tend to suffer from: simple undercarriage and, poorly attached vertical stabilizers. But the mold is seamless, and it's got a very nice shape. Dragon's printing typically isn't as good. This is actually a really nice example. This is a great mold too, and contends very nicely against this Apollo stroke Big Bird version. But I think that, the undercarriage and the tail, they're kind of on par, I'd say, but typically not printed as well. More common is the Gemini Jets mold, which dates all the way back from the formation of Gemini pretty much in 98, 99. It's a perfectly decent 747-400, except that this one really does have quite a poor join here. I think that it's better on the Apollo version. Though neither of them are perfect, it's better than this. The shape of the fuselage here isn't quite as good either. I mean, Gemini have actually been really good with this. They've updated the mould, it's got rolling gear. Later versions have probably got aerials too, though this one doesn't. It's a nice mould, but it's not quite as nice. The nose shape isn't quite as good. I haven't got any problem with it. It's certainly better than anything Phoenix have done in the last decade on a 747-400. So, for me, this is a great mould. It could only be improved really by adding aerials, and actually that's exactly what Big Bird Mark III did. This is one of the few releases they've put out, and you see that they've added aerials to it. Also got a bit of dome work going on. It's, you know, improved it. They didn't waste the time putting rolling gears on, and frankly that's good because I really like the landing gear on these. So for me, yeah, is it a 10? You know, it could be improved. It could have a seamless mould. It could have rolling gear. It could maybe have a slightly better engine wing joint. I think, you know, perhaps giving it 10 is a bit much, but considering its age, it is a very, very nice mould. I'm going to give it 9 out of 10 on the mould front. So on to the livery. This is actually one of my favourite modern liveries. It's called Nature's Wing, I believe, and Garuda introduced it in 2009. It's got just the right amount of colour, I think, and it's slightly nicer than their previous scheme, which I actually also have on an Apollo 747. This is nice as well, but it's just a bit more colourful, a bit more interesting than the previous livery, both of which were designed by Lander Associates, I believe. So how have Apollo done in applying the scheme? Well, they've done quite well, but not perfectly. I mean, first off, the colours are actually really good. I haven't got any problems with the colours. I've looked at photos. As is often the case, they look slightly different in different images, depending on the lighting conditions, but the greens and the blues, they're nice on this model. I think that they're as close to the real thing as they need to be. No real problems there. One thing that I do think that Apollo have got wrong, though, is the colour of the main titles. They're too dark. They should be a kind of medium grey. They look almost black on this model, and certainly in photos they're not quite. I think it's probably just kind of a charcoal, but they're a bit too dark. So I think that they should be lighter, so perhaps we'll lose a point there for the titles. The Garuda bird motif on the front, no problems there. It's a pretty simple livery, really. I did look and compare and nitpick in terms of the placement of the livery items, and it isn't actually quite 100% accurate. There's a little bit too much blue at the top here. This line, especially here, this medium line is too high. That should be lower. This lighter line should be thicker, so it's not quite right, but you don't really notice it. I mean, ironically, Phoenix actually got the colours and the livery application a little bit better, but as I've said, and I will no doubt say many, many more times, their mould is such a piece of shit that you really, really should not be buying it, regardless of mistakes made in the livery application by Apollo. As it is, this is a pretty decent application, but I think we'll lose 1 point for the main titles and another point for these tail stripes not being 100% where they ought to be. So that's an 8 out of 10 there for the livery application. So on to the stand for the last category, which is the printing and the quality control. This is, as I said, a relatively old model, 2013. The printing standards aren't quite where they are now back then, and so it's missing some detailing on the engines. It's missing nose cone rings, things like that. I mean, to be honest, the model looks really good. It doesn't bother me that it doesn't perhaps have some of the extra details. It does have quite a lot of detail. It's got, you know, the cut here panels. It's got, you know, really crisp, nicely painted livery. It's got very good cockpit windows, which is a really key thing, and something that that Dragon often didn't get right with their 747s, if you're looking at comparing the two. So overall, I think, you know, we'll give it a buy on the printing, considering its age. Now, something which perhaps they should have not done is have these incredibly silvery fan blades. That's something which is very common on older models. Yeah, I think probably there's a point for that. They're a bit bling, aren't they? They really ought to be darker than that. And indeed, you can see that if we compare it to the Canadian on the same mold, it's got darker because it's a much newer model. It's going to have those extra details, and it's got the nose cone ring printing. I mean, this is the same mold, but obviously it's newer. It's got better detail. It's got slightly better colouring inside the engines. In terms of construction, there are no problems. There are no rolling gears to muck up. The mold is a good, solid mold, easily put together. Everything's nicely in place. The model survived nicely. I mean, I've got it new. I bought this from the UK, so it's travelled from the UK to New Zealand. It's sat in its box for 7 years in whatever facility in the UK before I bought it from Aircraft Model Store, and basically, you know, it's still in great condition, perfect condition. So it's a great mold, really nice to put together. So I'll give it a 9 on the print and the quality of the model itself. So overall, what score is that? It's a 9 for the mold, it's an 8 for the livery, and it's a 9 for the printing. So that's a 26 out of 30, which is a good score for a model which is 7 years old and, you know, made by a company that doesn't even exist anymore, and perhaps at the time never really had a particularly high profile. But Willie had access to these good old Big Bird molds, as well as a selection of its own molds, which are okay but generally inferior. And you know, they put out some good stuff, which is hard to find, but still, as this model shows, possible, even new. It still seems like some of these models are unsold, but there are quite a few quite nice Apollo 747s which were produced in seemingly small numbers, which are really hard to find. Models like British Airways and so on. So, you know, if you can get hold of Apollo 747s, then I highly recommend them. I think they're really nice. I think that they display just as nicely as any modern 747. They display a damn sight more nicely than any of the Phoenix 747s. And, you know, I can think it's a great model. So go out and get it. Anyway, as always, if you enjoyed the video, then please subscribe and leave a like. Lots more of this kind of material is available at my website, Yesterday's Airlines, and I also do detailed model reviews in the same format but in print at modelairliner.com. So thanks for watching. See you later.